Hello, everybody. So I want to go over the labor and the manufacturing overhead budget with you today. So before we just jump into the calculations here, I would like to just go back and review to get our head back in the game. Originally, the client gave us this data and these assumptions. And so they told us how many units we were going to sell. From that, we had to figure out what to produce. We weren't going to just produce what we sell because we wanted a cushion or safety stock or a little bit on hand so we wouldn't be out of stock. And so how did we figure that out? We had to have their policy, and we had a policy for finished goods and a different policy for getting materials. So the amount of cushion for materials might not be exactly the same as the finished goods policy. They can be the same, but they are not necessarily the same. So you have to look into the story to see. For sales, we also had a policy where we had data given to us about what to assume in terms of how many of these sales would be cash versus credit. That was the 20 and 80. And for credit, when would we get the cash? For cash sales, it's obvious we got the cash when we sold it. But for the ones that we did on credit, when would we finally get those payments? And so that was this assumption. And of course, the assumption can change. And so that's why we didn't type in amounts on the other tabs as we were building the budget. And we're not going to type in amounts on these two budgets we're doing today. We're linking back to this original data, what's in the yellow cells, because the client might want to change those assumptions based on updated information. They also gave us the recipe for how to make one finished good. How many glass containers? 1. How much did it cost per container? How much wax was used? 4 ounce. How much did it cost per ounce? And the recipe probably won't change unless they change the product. But the price for each of these elements can change. So let's look at the labor. It takes 1/10 of an hour. All right, I guess 6 minutes. Takes 1/10 of an hour to make a candle. And right now they're paying $15 an hour for labor. And that can change. The recipe probably won't change, although it can if they change the process. But the labor cost per hour can change. And so we want to allow the client to update that and have the budget and everything associated with this part of the budget also change with it. So we don't have to redo everything because one of these assumption changes. We also have a variable overhead, which is $2 per direct labor hour. And then the fixed overhead is $1,000 per quarter. So we're going to be working on the labor budget. How much labor do we need and what will that cost us? And then how much overhead are we planning as well? So let's do that. So we're going to go over here to our labor budget. And so we want to know how many units are you going to produce. And so we're going to link that to the production budget. To remind you, you can use plus or equals. I pointed at that tab, clicked on the cell I wanted, and hit enter. And since I do want it to move to the right as I copy over, I do want a relative reference. I'm going to copy over. Now, how many direct labor hours per candle? I don't know why it says per case there, but I'll fix that. So how many labor hours per candle? Well, that's what we just saw, the recipe, right? So I'm going to link that back to the original data. So 0.1 hours, and then hit enter. Now this I want to be constant across all the sheets, because if you let it float to the right, I'm going to start getting weird trash in there. I just want the 0.1 for each quarter. All right, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click on the recipe and make it a relative reference, an absolute reference, or phrase it on that cell by clicking on F4. If you have a Mac, you have to type the $ in before the B and before the 18, before the letter and the number to lock it on that cell. All right, so the total labor hours will be how many units are going to produce times the 0.10 for each of those. Be careful not to type in the 0.10. Even though you know it's 0.10, it can change. So we're always linking back to the original data. Since we have a formula in here, I can put my cursor there and drag it to the right, or you can do the formula 4 times, whichever you prefer. Now, the cost per labor hour. Here we go. We're going to go back to the original data. We just saw that 15. I'm going to hit enter. And I do want it to stay on the 15 and not move to the right as I populate the other quarters. So I'm going to do the F4 again to freeze it. If you forget, what's going to happen is you get weird stuff over here. And then you go, oh yeah, I forgot to do that. And so the direct labor cost will be how many hours times that rate. So there's our direct labor. And then, of course, if you want the whole year, you can sum it all up. I don't know that we need the sum on the rest of it, but should you want that for something, you could certainly make a sum there. Now, manufacturing overhead. We have a variable piece and we have a fixed piece. The variable piece per quarter depends on how many hours per quarter you're incurring. So we know it's $2 per hour. Let's link back to that. We saw that just a second ago. $2 per direct labor hour. And I'm going to anchor that down and make it an absolute reference, the way we were just talking about. So the 2 is going to be in every quarter. And then how many direct labor hours in each quarter? Now I have to go back to my labor budget. Where's our direct labor hours per quarter? I'm copying across. So the variable manufacturing overhead will be the number of direct labor hours times the rate per hour. And now we can copy that to the right and get the variable overhead rate. And now per quarter, we know what we were given it per quarter. We don't have to put it on a per hour, per unit, any kind of basis. It's just a lump sum for the month. So I'm going to go back over here to our original data. $1,000 per quarter. Anchor on that. So as I copy it to the right, now the total manufacturing overhead is the variable overhead plus the fixed overhead. Manufacturing overhead, the total is the variable and the fixed together. All right. And then if I want the whole year, I can add that up. And as part of the overhead budget, you may recall that the predetermined overhead rate to be used in the upcoming year is based on the estimated or budgeted manufacturing overhead for the year. So during the budgeting process, you will use your budgeted, estimated, expected overhead for the year, which is this 4,352. You'll divide it by what this particular company has decided to use as an allocation base, in this case, direct labor hours. So now what are the annual direct labor hours? So back over here, we need to add up all these direct labor hours because now we need it. See, before we weren't sure if we needed it, but we do. So we'll link it back over here. We're not going to type it in. Everything's going to be a formula, but now we can calculate the predetermined overhead rate to be used going forward, 2473. All right. I'm actually going to put rounding in here. So you can use, I don't need the equals and the plus, but it won't hurt anything to have it in there. Round and then put the calculation in here, comma 2. That's how many decimal places I want it to round to. Now notice I'm not typing any amounts in here. I'm just putting how many decimal places I want it to round to. And so if you change the data, whatever the updated data is will also round. And that will keep me from having any rounding errors. So there is the labor and manufacturing overhead budget. We'll do the finished goods inventory budget in the next video.